So still thinking about your training week then, are you able, I'd just like to go maybe sort of like probe a little further. And so we're speaking about the acceleration session on a Monday with the sleds and the blocks. And it could go, I think you said as far as 40 or 45 meters, something like that.
Yep.
And so like typically how many runs or what sort of range of runs would you do for rep numbers on a session like that?
So 2 days ago, for example, we did 2 over 20, 2 over 30, 1 over 40, and 1 over 50.
Okay.
If we were, say, a couple of days out from a competition, a key competition, and we were feeling a little flat, so even before Brisbane, for example, I'd just come off the back of Sir Graham Douglas a couple of days prior, and then I had less than a week to prepare for the Brisbane Track Classic. I was feeling a little bit flat on that Monday or the Tuesday, whichever day we ended up switching things around. And so we did like 1 or 2 less reps just to keep the quality there. If we start to see the quality drop off, then we'll just kill the session.
Okay.
As a sprinter, it's not about volume, it's about getting good quality in. And if we do start to see times drop away, not that we're timing the block session, but after having done it for several years, you do start to get a really good feel for your own body and how quality the session feels. You know, I can usually feel when the time's dropping off before Morty even tells me what the time is after a rep.
Are you and him quite in sync with that? So like if he came and said that, I don't know, it looked like that was dropping off or something like that, would you likely feel that as well? Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's the benefit of having, I think that's a benefit of having sort of like such a long-standing sort of like coach-athlete relationship that you kind of get to know each other. You're that sort of much in sync with each other.
Yeah. Sure.
And then kind of like same question for the Tuesday session. So you're kind of doing the 150s or the 120s again, sort of like roughly how many runs? And again, I'm sure it varies, but sort of like ballpark.
Yeah, well, by this stage, if we're talking about January, that was when I was injured, so I should have been doing those sessions. But winter would actually be the same thing, but the recovery would be less and we'd be doing more.
Okay.
Versus summer where we're doing less reps with bigger recovery. So it might be like 3 150s with 10 minutes in between. But I actually find that harder than doing 6 150s with 4 minutes in between because the intensity is so much higher.
Yeah. I feel like mentally every rep's got to be switched on when you're kind of going for, if you're just doing 3 reps, then there's no
your nervous system, like it's a nervous system fried feeling versus a lactic feeling. Like you would get lactic after the 6 150s with 4 minutes in between versus feeling neurally fried after 3 150s.
And do you find like there's a pressure with it in terms of that, like if it's only 3 reps, like there's no space for a bad rep or anything like that?
Nah, yeah, and that's the thing
Nah,
that you
okay.
gotta. And then as soon as you start the first rep off well, then you're like, okay, now I've got to maintain this for the next 2.
Yeah.
And I was like historically quite bad at that. There was only one speed with me, and that's why I would historically battle with speed endurance. Oh, sorry, that's Siri talking. I used to struggle quite a lot because I'd go out really hard and then I'd not be able to sustain that same intensity throughout the rest of the session.
Right.
And I would usually start a speed endurance session doing the first rep going, okay, this is easy. I can do the next one. I can do the next one. But I've overestimated how much it actually takes to maintain that same intensity to the end. But I've grown in a good feel for sort of a tempo pace and where I sort of need to be to maintain what I'm capable of.
Yeah. Okay.
Still learning though.
Yeah. I'm sure there's sessions where it's something that's quite easy to mess up, right? Like I think you go a second too fast on rep 1, which can happen, and then
That's way too much.
you pay for it later on, right?
Yeah, and a second is huge. Like that could make or break.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you're feeling fresh at the beginning of a session, I think sometimes it can be difficult to know, quite how much you actually need to hold back in order to run at a pace where you can do 6 reps of it off a short recovery. It sort of like almost feels quite pedestrian that first rep.
Yeah, and I think going from high school where I was doing pretty low-key training to then moving to Auckland in a new training environment, you know, there's a lot more going on in Auckland. I actually had people around me training at the same time. Where I was training back home, I was just by myself on a grass field. Now I'm in a new group with other people around to train with as well.
So arousal levels are higher.
Yeah, and you see it with new people that come into our group as well. They go way too hard at the start, but I feel like when you step into a new group, you feel like you have to prove yourself, as well as learning what you're capable of and what the session actually takes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. And then Thursday and Saturday, they're more sort of like your sort of like speed days, I suppose, or like Thursday in particular. And I feel like Saturday kind of changes a bit depending upon where you are in the year. But if you're doing flying runs, again, same question. Sorry, I'm boring. Same question over and over again, but sort of like roughly how many reps would you be expecting to do, and sort of what kind of recoveries might you take?
It might be anywhere from 3 to 4 usually.
Okay.
Recoveries are full recoveries.
So when they're full, are they timed, or is it literally you go when you feel you take as long as you need to take?
Yeah, usually just go off feel. Like if it's a pure flying speed session and we're after pure speed, then I just go off feel.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess a rough indication of time, it might be like 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay. And then would that be the same kind of situations? So I think the example that you gave for a Saturday session, I believe it was like 60, 70, 80, something like that. Is that the same kind of situation? You know, you said that you're using that more as the session to sort of see where you're at in terms of see how ready you are for the season.
They have strict time, well, not strict, but they have timed recoveries. So that might be like if we're in a summer session, then it might range depending on which rep you're in, but I guess a rough indication would be anywhere from like 8 to 10 minutes in between.
Okay.
And so you should start to, it's sort of a hybrid between a speed session and a speed endurance session.
Yeah.
You should feel fatigued after, in terms of like you weren't able to go 110% in each rep. It's probably more of like a 95% intensity in each rep. But the challenge for us is like being able to maintain that effort or that intensity or that time consistently across all of the reps. So rather than going balls to wall in the first rep and absolutely killing it and then completely dropping off by the last rep, then we've not really nailed that session.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. And I guess that sort of like leads quite nicely into the next question, sort of about kind of like cueing. And so like, are there any kind of like specific cues that you feel are particularly effective for you? I find cueing interesting. So I just think it's such an individual thing where it's like you can get two athletes that think about exactly the same thing, but one interprets it differently, or it leads to like a different movement pattern. I'm curious as to if there's any cues that you feel like are really effective for you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's something that we're constantly trying to evolve. There's lots of different cues that I've been given. It depends on what our focus is on the time. Like one big thing that I'd been trying to focus on last year was to increase my stride length. And so we were trying to work on some cues around that. But then if it's the blocks, then a good example there would be trying to bring my arm out rather than up, because I usually lift my shoulders like this, which means I'm not projecting forward. So thinking about cues with the hands. Sorry,
no, you're fine. I'm curious about the stride length one, because I think that's almost like that's quite something that I think is quite difficult to cue, because you end up, it's easy to have somebody to have an athlete think about reaching out in front, which is something that you don't want. So you want more stride length, but you want it in a particular way without kind of like reaching out and grabbing the ground in front of you and striking the ground like well ahead of your center of mass and stuff like that. So were there any cues that you found sort of like resonated with regards to your stride length?
We started to wear Leela a bit. The wearable.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
That was helping give a bit of feedback to me to be able to actually feel the movements, because it sort of slows you down a little bit and allows you the time to actually feel it.
Are they the
Um,
really light weights that are kind of just like put on different joint segments?
yeah,
Sort of like half a kilo or less or something like that. Is that right?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the one.
Okay.
Um, then I ended up getting injured, and it was a pretty tight time frame in terms of being able to open my season. Literally opened at nationals, and as soon as that happened, then we stuck to the conservative model of like, okay, we just need to focus on um, being healthy, and there was no thinking about reaching or getting stride length. I just was focusing on running healthy and
Yeah.
uninjured. So we sort of lost a bit of time there in terms of like focusing on the stride length.
So you
It would
just
have
kind
been,
of like went with what you had at that point.
yeah, pretty much. And it would have been interesting to see had we kept progressing with what we were working on, whether it would have manipulated or changed my stride length.
Mhm.
Based on the data we're seeing, it didn't actually change at all. I just got faster. So I'm not really sure what changed that. The training obviously worked some way, shape, or form, but
Yeah.
in terms of the cues, or yeah, I think the Leela really helped give me feedback.
Yeah, okay. And I guess like that's a cueing tool in itself, right? Cues don't necessarily need to be like verbal, but there's different things that you can do, whether you're using like wickets or like you said, wearable resistance or something that just gives you some sort of like proprioceptive awareness. You're just placing some constraint on the environment that can, like you say, give you some feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. So we're kind of getting close to the end, but this is a question that I'm really interested to ask. So like, how closely are you monitoring things like sleep and nutrition? And I think like speaking to you about nutrition in particular is something that I think is going to be interesting. So obviously your academic background as well in your business.
Mm. Yeah, I'd say my nutrition is more closely monitored than my sleep. Sleep is a definite area of work on for me. I think when life gets carried away with the other stuff I'm doing on the side of sport as well, it's
Yeah.
a definite work on. And same with my nutrition, like it kind of did slip a little bit. Everything outside of like when I'm at training's no worries at all. Like when I'm at training, it's 110% good. Like I'm mentally all there, but then as soon as I come away from that and I've got life going on around me, that's when the other recovery things start to fall a little bit. That's partly how I got injured end of last year as well, and that was a big lesson and probably a silver lining that happened.
Okay.
Probably needed to happen for me to re-switch my thinking. At that time, sleep was terrible, nutrition was poor, so that really allowed me to reframe things. But in terms of generally, like aside from the patch where I had ended last year, life was just chaotic. There was a lot going on. Generally, my nutrition is pretty good, and I'm lucky that I've got a good intuitive feel for it, having studied it and spent a lot of time experimenting with it as well. But it's just about fueling to feel good. It's pretty hard to track and monitor without being overly obsessive. And I'm lucky that I've got a nutritionist to work alongside me at high performance sport. But I guess that's the purpose of trying to build Athos, is to create a tool that helps figure out what you need in various meals across a day, with like, because the other thing with athletes is it changes depending on whether it's a double session day, a rest day, a single training day, a competition day is also very different. So Athos is trying to create a tool that helps cater to all those different days without putting too much obsessive thinking into it. It's essentially a meal planner that figures out your energy needs and puts that into meals, and you can select the meals that you need.
Right. Okay.
Without you thinking about like how much energy or calories you're consuming, it just gives you exactly what you need.
Yeah, I think I think it's really easy to be obsessive with stuff like that, and even with things like with the fitness trackers now and things like sleep, and you get 7 hours and 56 minutes sleep, but you realize, oh no, I haven't hit my 8 hour target, and then it's easy to become sort of like a bit neurotic about it. And I think likewise with some of the tracking apps, like say like MyFitnessPal, and especially if you're kind of going, I mean, I might be way off on kind of these ideas, but you're trying to track all 3 macros, and then you end up at the end of the day and you've kind of got 50 calories left, but you need 3 grams of protein, 8 grams of and you're sort of like trying to manage all these numbers. And I can see how people fall into a trap, and it sort of ends up being the stress of trying to optimize your recovery actually undermines the recovery in itself, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, and it might work for some people, but the MyFitnessPal model doesn't work for me. I would rather be presented exactly what I need before the day starts and then know how that structure should fit everything else. And not think too hard about how many macros I'm having or the energy I should be having. Just know that what's in that plan is going to work. And as I mentioned, I think I've built up a good feel for what works, and really lucky that I can work alongside a nutritionist, because even though I am a nutritionist myself, you still need that second opinion and to lean on other people for their advice as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a similar scenario with being a self-coached athlete and coaching other athletes. I think in that when it's you, I think it's far more difficult to be objective about it. I think kind of like emotions kind of cloud the judgment a little bit more. And with that, are there ever scenarios that, obviously you've got your nutrition background and you're working with a nutritionist, where, I don't know if butt heads, but you have sort of like a disagreement on principles or ideas? Is that sort of ever arisen?
No, it hasn't. And I actually got my nutritionist recently to write me a full plan, because I was quite interested in what their perspective would be in terms of whether it strayed too far from what I currently do. And it wasn't actually much different from what I'm currently doing, just some minor tweaks around timing and things. And no, we don't butt heads. It's pretty similar.
I probably said butt heads. That was probably a bit aggressive for what I meant, but you know what I mean? Just sort of like have slightly different
but it is
perspectives.
interesting that you say that, because it can be quite polarizing in different views in nutrition. You know, some people are, I think athlete nutrition is pretty straightforward, as complex as you could make it. It's just about fueling adequately and making sure you're getting enough for recovery and being able to sustain your sessions.
So with that, I mean, you might have just covered this as an answer, but kind of like, what are your basic principles for athlete nutrition? Is it just that, or is there anything else that you would sort of, you know, if you had to write down sort of like 3 or 4 bullet points or 5 bullet points or whatever for, you know, somebody as a starting point, what might they be?
Yep. So I'm focused more on protein and carb especially as a sprinter, because you need quick energy. But I'm not restricting the amount of fat that I'm having. I'm still getting adequate amounts of that. And then timing is really important as well. So making sure you're having something half an hour to an hour before. So snacks are really important. And I think as an athlete, but everyone's individual as well, so it's hard to say. But for me,
that was going to be my next question. But
and it doesn't work to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's it, because I would start to get really peckish throughout the rest of the day. So focusing on having a pre-training snack and then a post-training snack is also really good to get recovery and after the session. And I think snacks throughout the day is also good to sustain your energy throughout the day and give you tolerance.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fantastic.
The protein snacks.
And I think it was a really interesting point that you made, that it can be like sort of like quite polarized. I think, like, from what I see, at least on the internet and, you know, social media, is that like nutrition is something that can be sort of like quite tribal almost. Like people, they sort of like adhere their identity to the way they choose to eat. And the other thing that I've heard, which I can imagine being the case, is that everybody eats, so then everybody feels like they've got some experience in this domain. And you know, you already said that it's something that's quite individual, but something that works for one person may not necessarily work for the other. But people because it's worked for them, they're telling them that, you know, that can be quite vocal about, well, no, this is what works because it's worked for them. Yeah,
I agree. And it's been an interesting journey with nutrition for myself, having gone from this common belief around healthy foods as well.
Right.
As an athlete, you need to fuel adequately, and sometimes that requires eating pasta and having lollies in sessions and before sessions and things like that, foods that are deemed as demon foods to society. Sort of unlearning those things and allowing yourself the freedom to have those foods. It's really changed my approach to nutrition and how I feel in sessions, because for a period there, you know, coming out of high school and moving away from home to live in Auckland, and was starting to prepare food for myself, that there was some, I was exposed to having to learn to cook for myself, and really started to go down that toxic pathway of only eating healthy and not allowing myself freedom to have all these other important foods as an athlete.
Yeah, I can imagine that's not unusual, right? That sort of like people kind of get into that situation. It's not unusual. And I guess sort of like my last kind of comment regarding the whole sort of polarized sort of tribalistic sort of approach. I think the same thing happens in sprint training as well. There's quite often like Twitter wars going on between coaches that might be advocating like a really low volume approach, and then coaches that are advocating something with a little bit more volume. And I think ultimately, like you said before, like you need to have space to kind of be flexible depending upon the individual that you're working with. And I can imagine it's very much the case in nutrition as well. Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to wrap up with my last question. So your favorite track session and your least favorite track session. Is there any track session where like you see it on the piece of paper and you're like, oh, I could do without that today?
I always think about Saturday sessions, and like
you
currently,
call that go day? Was it go day or on day? I can't remember what you called it.
Yeah, but they've really varied over the years. So we used to do like hills at the beach and
right.
Winter grind sessions, and we'd all, like back in the day, we'd catch up for coffee before these sessions, and all of us would feel really nervous before the session. I feel like it felt like a bloody comp day.
Yeah.
Knew that it was going to hurt and that we'd be in lactic pain at the end of these hill sessions, I love the anticipation of those sessions. They're really hard, but they feel really good at the end of them.
Yeah.
Even now with the Saturday sessions, you get the odd session where you're on the ground in pain, but I think just the quality of that session and the importance behind that session is what I like about them.
So you get some endorphins going on afterwards when you got like a sense of satisfaction.
Yeah, and then you get the day off for the rest of Saturday, so it's always a nice way to end the week.
Okay, yeah. And then what about, so I don't know, are you saying that's your least favorite session and your favorite session at the same time?
Yeah, it's sort of polarizing in that sense.
Okay.
I like the anticipation and I like being nervous before them because it shows that we really care.
Yeah.
Doing the session like live in that moment.
Yeah.
Like I would say by the second to last rep, you're in absolute pain if you were to do the hill session, which we've not done in a long time.
Absolute pain, I like that.
I reckon it's always like the second to last one that's the worst. Actually, not the third to last, because the second to last, you've only got one left after that, and then the last one, it's the last one, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just want to finish off by saying thank you. You've been a great guest. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think there's been loads of information that's going to be helpful for anybody that's listening. Also, I want to kind of wish you the best for the rest of 2023. So kind of like what's your plans now in terms of I feel like, so your domestic season's done by this point, right? When are you next planning on competing, or has that not been planned yet?
Yeah, I'm heading away for 3 comps in May. Some big travel ahead. I'm going to the Doha Diamond League, which is really exciting.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so that'll be my second ever Diamond League. Really looking forward to that, and then heading straight from there to Nairobi for the gold I've got there, and then I'll be heading from there to Yokohama for the Seiko Grand Prix.
Okay. All right.
And then home for about a month, and then I'll head back to Europe late June.
Ahead of Budapest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Nairobi in particular, that's a quick place to race as well, right? So that should be a fun one. I actually went to the Doha Diamond League as a spectator back in 2016, so I'm sure you're going to be guaranteed some nice kind of warm, humid weather that sprinters like there. So that would be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all the best. I hope it goes well. I'm sure it will. I have no doubt you're going to have another great season. And finally, just like where can people find you on social media? And I don't know if you want to kind of plug your business, if you have a social media page for that as well.
Yep. So you can find my personal page. I'm primarily on Instagram. I've recently gotten a TikTok, but I'm not very active on there. That might change.
TikTok's a tough one for me. I don't really know what I'm doing on that, so I've just kind of left that. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm still trying to navigate it. I was too stubborn for years I kind of just left it, but on Instagram it's Zoe__Hobbs. And then I'm pretty sure it's the same on TikTok, Zoe__Hobbs.
Okay.
And then business pages, athos.app. So ATHOS.app.
Okay. And do they have social media pages as well, or not at the moment?
Yeah, we're on Instagram.
Okay. And that's what the Instagram handle?
We're in development at the moment because we're building an app.
Okay.
We're probably 3/4 of the way through.
Okay.
The next step for us is to do beta testing with athletes. And the website should be launching very soon. So
Okay.
it's all starting to come together, which is
All
exciting.
right, fantastic. So sorry, was that the Instagram page where it was? So it was at athos.app?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, my fault. Sorry, I thought that was a website. All right, fantastic. All right. Well, Zoe, thank you again. It's been absolutely fantastic. And yeah, wish you all the best in the lead up to Budapest.
Thank you.